All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Swish Theory NBA Draft Podcast. I'm Will Morris, and today I'm joined by Ben Pfeifer. Ben, how you doing today?
I'm doing well. I'm excited to dive into these bigs. And I'm glad to be on your podcast after I invited you on mine a week or so ago. But yeah, hope everything's going well. I've had a nice busy day, but this is good. This is a good time sync for me because I have a rec league basketball game at 9, which is disgusting, by the way, that it's that late. But usually I'm just waiting around for it to do nothing. So I'm glad I have this now.
Yeah, talk about Derik Queen, maybe pull out some Derik Queen moves on the court. I don't know what
I
your
will
play
be doing.
style is, but
Yeah, I'll pull out some one leg fadeaways and some falling asleep on defense, I'm sure at some point today. But
yeah, for sure. So, as Ben mentioned, today we're going to be talking about some of the premier big men in this class, sort of following this journey. I don't know if you guys have caught the last two episodes, but essentially what we're doing here is just breaking down the top prospects in the class, giving my thoughts on them, and then at the end we sort of do a little ranking so that you guys can see how my board is formulating. But yeah, I don't want to take too much time with the intro here because I know you got your rec league ball game. So
y'all good.
let's just
It's a quick drive over. Y'all good.
we'll get right into it though. So the three players we're breaking down today are Khaman Maluach from Duke, Derik Queen from Maryland, and Thomas Sorber from Georgetown. So why don't we start off with Maluach? I think he's generally kind of ranked as the top big amongst these guys. So Maluach from South Sudan played at Duke this season. I think the thing that pops off the screen and sort of the stat sheet with him is just his insane measurements. Legit 7'2" in shoes, 7'7" wingspan, 252.8 pounds. And yeah, I think that those kind of measurements sort of define his game on both ends. So Ben, why don't you tell me about Maluach and sort of his play style, and I guess starting with offense, how those measurements sort of manifest in his offensive skill set.
For sure. And at the moment, he's kind of your rim running big. I think that's probably what he projects to be at the NBA, even though, he's super young. He's only 18 years old, but he can expand his role. But right now, Malawach weaponizes his crazy good size to finish at the basket. But he also, the thing that makes Malawach so exciting to me is like the size and the touch combination. Like he has this crazy, 9'6" standing reach, 7'7" wingspan, obviously, standing above seven, almost 7'1" without shoes, with pretty big hands. Like he is just someone who I think definitely has some rawness in terms of like sometimes like when he catches the ball below his shoulders, he can bobble it, but you just kind of toss it up to Malawach and he can go make plays. And some of the most impressive stuff to me is the way he's able to finish like non-dunks around the rim, where his ability to finish layups and hook shots and runners in that intermediate area is just so goddamn impressive for a player of his size. Like it's rare for players who can dunk everything like Malawash because of the incredible size. Like I calculated all of this or I charted all of this where Malawach this year shot a completely ridiculous 84% at the rim in the half court. That's by far the best of anyone in this class. Second best would be Ryan Kalkbrenner, who is almost 8% lower at 76.4%. So gap between him, between Malawach and two is the same gap between Kalkbrenner and someone like Rasheer Fleming or Janai Broom, which shot about 67% down in ninth or 10th. So he's a truly absurd finisher, not just the dunking, but his ability to tap in lobs, to finish layups at weird angles. And I think while he probably is just going to, I'd say the most kind of likely outcome from an offense is just being a screener and a rebounder and a rim runner. Like he could be one of these guys who's just like such a high level play finisher. that he can maybe almost like transcend that archetype a little bit value wise, especially in like playoff basketball, where you know I think a lot of people rightfully have questions about this kind of archetype, but we do see players like it, Rudy Gobert, Mitchell Robinson. He's different than these players, right? But just, these gigantic traditional fives can definitely add value. And I think Malawach is different from both of those guys for sure, but his touch is crazy. Like that's the main thing. The size and the touch and the finishing on the roll and the cut and all of that. And of course having like Cooper and Connaughton able to throw him lobs is helpful, but he's hopefully gonna have good guards in the NBA too.
Yeah, for sure. I think you hit the nail on the head here. And I think with him, and we can get into some of these other things shortly here, there is a lot of rawness with him, but you kind of got to have this idea in the back of your mind of the things that he does well. He does really, really well. And those are very important skills as well. Like for a big man, just being a good play finisher, being huge, being able to catch lobs. I think he's a very good screen setter. I think he's physical. I like how he makes contact. And like you said, I mean, that lob catching and that catch radius, I think it could sort of transcend that value that is traditionally assigned to rim runners just because he's already so good in this role and he's so young and is only going to get better. Um, I like that you mentioned his touch as well. He shot 76.6% from the foul line, which is pretty
Pretty good.
nuts for someone that's kind of in this, he started playing basketball at 13, right? So he's newer to the game. I think there's times where you see a lot of these like big, like I think Mitchell Robinson is probably like the perfect example of this. Who was struggling from the foul line, doesn't have like phenomenal touch, but has some of those like crazy physical measurements. Because normally guys like that don't have to fully rely on touch just because they have these measurements. But it's cool to see that Maluach has really developed that part of his game. Um, so yeah, I also really like his aggressiveness on the offensive glass. His offensive rebounding rate was 16.5%, which in college is, I think it's like it probably taught, I think it was, I was looking at this on Bart just before. So that'd be like the 13th highest offensive rebound rate season amongst players drafted since 2008. So that's very
Yeah, and it
good.
was eighth this year too, just in the entire country among all players. And Maluach was the only freshman in the top 20. Yeah, only freshman in the top 20 of offensive rebounding rate. So pretty good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And it definitely popped on film. Like I remember just watching in the tournament kind of as a fan, and he had that kind of infamous game where he didn't have a single rebound against Houston. But I think just looking at the season as a whole, I'm not very concerned about his rebounding. I think he does show tenacity there. He's good at high pointing the ball, even if he'll miss a box out every now and then. I think that's stuff that you expect from a young big. But like, yeah, his offensive rebound rate higher than some of the most prominent rebounders of our generation, like Andre Drummond, Steven Adams, Kevin Love. Like, name a guy he probably had a higher offensive rebound rate than them in college. So, yeah, love his tenacity there. Not afraid to get physical. I do want to ask where you're at on the shooting slash do you think it even really matters with a guy like him? Because again, I think most of what he's going to be doing is rolling to the basket, crashing the offensive glass, and that's where he's going to really provide value. Um, but at the same time, we've talked about his touch. He's great from the foul line, great on those little hook shots. He shot on Bert Torvik. He was at 60.7% on non-dunk two-pointers, and most of them are close to the rim. But still, I think he has a really good touch in that close range that could maybe translate out to the three-point line. Do you think that's something that's going to be part of his game going forward?
I'm a little skeptical, at least compared to how I've seen some people maybe talking about him as a potential future shooter. Like, I'm not as big as some people on just like touch around the basket being predictive like a powerful predictor for 3-point shooting, especially without like early career volume, where it's like, yeah, there were some flashes in like the Basketball Africa League, but again, that's such like a low level of competition, and he took like 53s across 2 years. So it's definitely more than he did, but it's nothing crazy. It wouldn't shock me at all if he was a guy who was like hitting wide open spot ups. Like he obviously has the touch, and we've seen him do it before the NBA, but I kind of doubt he will ever be like a total difference making 3-point shooter who's, just totally stretching the floor, spacing defenses out. But I do think he's someone who it wouldn't shock me if at his peak is capable of stepping out, knocking down a corner three or two, keeping defenses honest, just because it seems like so many bigs are adding that like wide open shooting to their bag, even if it's not like the most valuable thing to me, especially in a playoff setting. It wouldn't shock me if he ended up getting there, but I like it. It's not something I'm like baking in super hard into my projection. Like I have him in like the top 10-ish, not because I think he's going to shoot, but because of all the other things he does well.
Yeah, I think we're on the same page there. And I think part of why I kind of also baked into that question, like, does it really matter? I think
Yeah,
there's times in my time scouting the draft where you like see these big men and people are like, oh, well, if they shoot. And at the end of the day, I think if you're an NBA team, you'd rather see them sort of perfect their craft as far as the big man skills go rather than just hammering in like shoot threes. I think Derek Lively is the example of this that pops into my mind. I just remember with him pre-draft, there was all this talk of, oh, and he shoots threes, or he could shoot threes potentially. When I think Lively's skill set, and I think the Mavs have done a good job of kind of hammering this in. Just be really good in drop coverage, like be disruptive on D, be a great rim runner, catch lobs, dunk, and he's been super, super impactful early in his career. So I'd rather see a development staff sort of kind of hammer those things home with him than develop the shooting. Maybe the shooting comes later on in his career, but yeah, I'm not expecting Maluach to be shooting, multiple
yeah.
threes a game at any point in the near future. Um, yeah, is there anything else that you wanted to say about his offense? I think he's definitely raw in a lot of ways. Like he's not someone that you're gonna see putting the ball on the floor all the time. Not a super high level passer at this stage in his career.
Yeah, the processing is probably the biggest worry for me. I mean, that and like the physicality isn't super great, which I think like obviously, people saw like the Houston game, whatever, he didn't get a rebound, but I think that can manifest more in like not being able to get position on the interior or like getting knocked off of his spot when he catches it. And of course, like he has the touch to make up for that at some points where he can just shoot the ball in from weird spots, even if he is knocked off of his spot. But yeah, I'd say the processing is definitely the most concerning thing. And it's like he barely ever passed the ball. It's like that just wasn't his role, really. Duke didn't put him in very many positions to pass the ball this year. Like he just didn't really have to do it, right? Like he had one game with 3 assists, he had 6 games with 2 assists, and he had 5 games with 1 assist. And then the vast majority of his games he had no assists, right? Like it just wasn't part of his role. But I do think there were, basic enough flashes of like quick kickouts after an offensive rebound. And he's, flashed a tiny bit of passing chops. Like if you look through his whole career, like Basketball Without Borders camp, I remember him doing some more stuff with the ball. Obviously, that's like a camp scrimmage, so it's hard to really take too much away. But that would definitely be my main worry with Maluach and my main like swing factor, where I'm confident he's going to be an awesome play finisher. I'm pretty confident he's not going to be like a game-changing shooter or someone who's really creating from the perimeter. But if he can be an even like competent, solid processor, and I think this applies on defense as well as like a swing skill, that I think that's going to be really big. And like again, we've seen plenty of bigs with like poor assist to turnover ratio and like low assist numbers in college end up working out or improving as passers. I think for like true centers, passing numbers are probably the least predictive in terms of not even just like passing ability, but feel and NBA translation. Whereas for like more perimeter oriented players, I think it's very, very important for guys to be those just really, effective, snappy passers, good assist to turnover ratios and whatever. But like there's plenty of players like him. Um, who ended up being good passers. Like just looking at it right now, like all the guys who had an assist to turnover below one, like Towns, Chet, Jaren Jackson, just like to name some top picks. And these guys obviously different ranges in terms of the level of passer they get to. But there's just so many players who I mean, Sabonis, another example. Like, I'm not necessarily like so think it's impossible for him to develop into like a guy who can hit like basic short roll reads and stuff. But I do think for his ceiling, again, it's like probably never going to be a guy who's like a real plus needle mover as someone who's making plays and just like reading the floor really quickly.
Yeah, and I think it kind of falls into the shooting category. Although I think for just general like team basketball, just being a snappy decision maker, moving the ball around is like more important to me for him than like him developing a jumper is. I think it kind of falls into a similar category where it's like, okay, 58% of his attempts at the rim were of his attempts at the rim were dunks. If he's catching a pick and roll and it's just a lob, like, are you going to expect him to like pass out of that? Right. Like his assist rate is naturally going to be low because
Right.
that's what his role is. It's not like he's catching on the short roll 100 times a game and is like asked to distribute and make plays from there. It's just not the position that he was put in. So there was, like a couple lazy, kind of like lackadaisical passes that kind of like pop up on his film, but I think it wasn't something that was concerning for me while diving in because I think that's kind of stuff that you see with everyone. At the same time, you don't see those high level reads that you might see with like a Queen or a Sorber just because that's
Yeah.
not what Malawach's role necessarily was. Um, so yeah, why don't we move along to his defense? Um, yeah, I guess thinking about like his pick and roll defense specifically, where do you think he really shines? Like, what do you think is the ideal coverage for him? Because I think Duke kind of deployed him in a lot of different ways there.
Yeah, I think one of the important things to think about with Maluach is just the scheme that he played in college. Like they asked him at Duke to switch. They asked him to hard hedge and recover. They asked him to play at the level, and he struggled a lot doing that this season. I think that's kind of natural for a guy his size to I think his mobility in terms of like g big space ground coverage is freaky, but he's not like the quickest when it comes to like flipping his hips and short area quickness, which most 7 footers aren't going to be. So I think mid drop is probably where he's best at the moment. Like I've always loved his hand usage. He's really active, like stabbing his hand to the ball handler, trying to bait him, into a mistake. And I think he's really fluid backpedaling. And of course, the length is just really, really important. But there really is potential to me to be like a totally versatile pick and roll coverage guy. Obviously, I think he can deep drop just because of his size. Like he didn't do that a ton at Duke, honestly. They just didn't ask him to play super deep coverages like you'd see a lot of more traditional bigs do, but definitely best in drop, I'd say for sure. But someone who can definitely hedge out and recover. I think that was something he did pretty well. I wouldn't like want him switching, right? But he did it a lot. Like they asked him to switch a lot, and of course it helps when you have a guy like Cooper Flag on the back line, right? So even if you make mistakes, you have another awesome guy to kind of clean up, and even like Conwell position generally. Duke was just an awesome defensive team, right? And throughout, so they could get away with this kind of stuff. But I like that his role was so varied and so, difficult because I think that's going to serve him well going forward. Like, there's a very good chance his NBA defensive role is going to be significantly easier, relative to the competition, obviously. Just speaking about like the sheer role that he's in, might is probably going to be less taxing, especially mentally, where his processing and feel on defense definitely needs work, right? Just in terms of awareness, positioning himself on time, like oftentimes I think his motor is fine. Like I don't think trying hard is an issue, but sometimes I think he can be a little late to read stuff defending off of the ball. But of course, just his crazy physical tools can help him recover. But yeah, I think one of the most intriguing things about Malawash is the potential to be, a more diverse pick and roll coverage guy than you generally think for a player of his size. And I think that's what most of the best defensive bigs in the league are like that to some extent. Obviously, he's never going to be switchy to the extent of like an Evan Mobley, right? But even like Gobert is much more effective than his rep on switches, like Mitchell Robinson as well. Another guy, just to keep bringing him up. Obviously, they're different players, but yeah, I think he's a very, very interesting kind of pick and roll project for whatever team to take.
Yeah, yeah. I think that I'm happy you mentioned that, he kind of played in this jack of all trades type defensive role at Duke, because I think someone with his measurements, you kind of just assume, okay, they're going to play and drop. I think like a lot of his most impressive moments to me were kind of in that like show and recover type role where he's
Yeah.
just like launching at a ball handler and just waving his arms up and causing disruption. And he is very good at covering those large swaths of ground, like you mentioned. So I think that's like something that he could definitely do in the NBA. I think just like my general worries with his pick and roll defense is that even though he was kind of very coverage versatile at Duke, he was kind of raw in all those
Oh yeah.
coverages, right? I think in drop, like I think that's probably where he's, primarily going to be deployed. So you can really take advantage of that wingspan at the rim. There was definitely moments where you could kind of like see the wheels churning in his brain of like, okay, I'm in a stance, like I'm backpedaling here, but he wouldn't always like finish the possession and like in the best way. Like the lob would come and he'd still be in that like backpedaling. So I do worry about that ability to just like elevate quickly out of a back pedal. I think he contains pretty well, but
Yeah, I was gonna his vertical explosiveness is another one of my main concerns with him. Like obviously to some extent it's not like a crazy concern just because of his physical tools and the reach, but like he is not very explosive off the floor. Just in general, which I do think could definitely be an issue at the next level.
yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, it's definitely worrisome when you see someone with his measurements getting lobs thrown over him because the ball should never really be making it over. Everyone will give a few possessions every now and then, but I think it was noticeable that there was times where like lobs made it over his head. So I definitely worry about that ability to really just punish offenses in drop. So I do think kind of mixing in those different coverages is going to be necessary for him, definitely early in his career. Um, I think switching, like, there's definitely a lot of rough moments there. Like, I just don't know if he has those short area movement skills. Like, I think he really excels defensively when he's asked to cover those sort of large areas of ground, right? Like rotating from the weak side to swat a shot or something like that. But I don't think he's great guarding in space right now. Um, Definitely will like open his hips and give up angles to ball handlers. Again, this is stuff that you see from a lot of bigs, but I guess I'm just not super confident that he's going to be like this dominant drop big just because of some of those vertical explosion limitations. So,
Yeah, I think part of the appeal for Maluach to me is like I think his ability to be at least competent in so many areas rather than just being like elite in one area in terms of like pick and roll coverage. I mean, I think his like rim protection and ground coverage like outside of pick and roll could be like super elite. But just
yeah,
speaking like within pick and roll coverages.
yeah, yeah, for sure. I think that's definitely like I hope that kind of in his next location he's put in this Duke position where they kind of deploy him in a lot of different ways because I think that just creates challenges for an offense, right? Just having this 7'2" dude with a 7'7" wingspan running all over the place on defense. I think that's
Right.
presents more of a challenge for an offense than okay, we're just gonna play this guy in drop. Because I just don't think he's like there quite yet as far as a drop, just being like a pure drop big goes.
Yeah.
Um, so I guess like putting the pieces of the puzzle together here. Um, Maluach definitely has these like really strong strengths on offense related to his measurements and touch, defense measurements, and just like overall ground coverage. Um, I know you mentioned he's kind of in this top 10-ish range, so, but just like generally speaking, like this rim running big archetype, how do you sort of value that? Because I think like at least in my time covering the draft, there's been a lot of talk of like, oh, that's just like a replaceable sort of build. But then you see someone like Lively come into the NBA and it's like, okay, I know he was only drafted like 3 years ago at this point, but he's going to go way higher in a redraft than he was actually picked. So, how do you sort of like gauge the value of this archetype?
Yeah, I definitely don't think it's as replaceable as maybe traditional wisdom suggests. Like, especially when there's like high level stuff potentially on defense, where it's like, with Malawash to me, it's just the way that he can move in space at his measurables is like extremely rare. Even if he doesn't have like the quick twitch to do everything you want, like some of the stuff he can do as like a weak side zone defender as a 7-footer is truly absurd. So I think if you have those really high end traits, like again, we saw like a quote unquote traditional big man rim runner in Mitchell Robinson like wreck that Pacers series. Like he was terrifying to me as a Pacers fan just because of his glass eating and his play finishing and his defense overall. So I think these can be like real playoff game changers. It's definitely tougher for them. Like they need relatively specific fits and roster context. But with Malawash, to me, it's also like I don't want to get too caught up on talking about this specific archetype because archetypes and roles can change, right? Like there is development that can happen that could expand his role potentially, which obviously, far from a guarantee. But I do think this role, while, I've kind of been all over the place, I think at his peak, at the very high end outcome, this can be a guy that you take with a top 3 pick or a top 5 pick. I think if you're, I'd take Rudy Gobert with a top 5 pick in every draft, like,
Yeah.
or potentially higher. And that's an extremely high bar that Malawatch probably will not reach. But I do think there is like a high end ceiling where he is just this absurd play finisher on a team with some really good like interior passers, and he has a good defensive supporting cast and is this just like totally mobile anchor who improves his physicality. Where I definitely have become like a little bit lower on how realistic that is, but I do think he's like worth the top 10 pick, just not necessarily like a top 5 pick like I thought earlier in this cycle. But again, I think it's very roster dependent and like context dependent, but the right team I think can get a lot of value out of him.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like I said, like his strengths are just so strong, and I think he's someone that just like as a pick and roll big is just going to provide instant value. I think that for him in his rookie year, just like making the game as simple as possible and just kind of playing the hits is going to be huge. Like I think he is going to provide instant value as a guy that can protect the rim, crash the offensive glass, and catch lobs. Like he will be able to do that instantaneously. So that's just a very advantageous thing to have as a prospect, just having those sorts of bankable skills. So regardless of like the value of the archetype or whatever, I think that he just has legitimate NBA size and NBA skills. So yeah, definitely would consider myself a Malawatch fan. Do you think we should move on to Queen here?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I'd agree. Like again, I think I might be a little lower than like where he's like rated on a consensus boards, but I don't think I'm like that far off in terms of the evaluation.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think like I definitely wouldn't because I've seen him as high as like 3 or something like that. That's not a place I would be at with him right now.
Yeah,
Uh,
I've tinkered with him that high throughout the cycle. I'm not there anymore, but like I understand the thought process to get there, even if I'm not there anymore.
yeah, yeah. Like I said, I mean, he has I think skills that are very bankable and he is very impactful, but also very raw at the same time. So I think being raw, but still maintaining like a certain level of impact is just valuable. Like that's
Yep.
just something that's very appealing. That's what you look for in the draft, having skills that you can improve, right? While also just being an impactful player on the court. So why don't we move on to Queen here? Definitely a very different sort of big. Freshman at Maryland, measured in at like 6'9" and some change at the combine. So just to like a hair under 6'11" in shoes, 7 foot and a half wingspan, 248 pounds, really solid build. Um, yeah, I think just like the general theme with him, and we'll get more into the defense later, but I think just like the one sentence summary that I've seen kind of like just reading some online scouting reports and whatnot is like offensive centric big that isn't really giving you much on the defensive end. Um, when you click his like direct stat comparison comps on Bartorvik, the first names that come up are Blake Griffin, Jared Sullinger, Anthony Bennett, Jared Sullinger his sophomore year, and Vernon Carey. There's obviously some really exciting names there, like a Blake Griffin, and then there's some less than exciting names as well. I generally have not been a big fan of the like one way big archetype. Um, I think I just value bigs that can protect the rim and things like that. But I mean, there's something about Queen that like just seems different than like a
Mm.
Vernon Carey, for example, who was super, super impactful offensively at Duke. Definitely had his offensive flaws, but just like as an offensive player in college, Vernon Carey was phenomenal for a freshman. So for you, what is it that sets Queen apart from some of these offensive focused bigs that haven't really produced much in the NBA?
Yeah, I agree with you that this is like an archetype that I'm generally resistant to and wasn't super high on early in the season, but I took the pill at some point. Like he is again a good example to me of just like not underrating someone because you don't like their archetype or because a lot of players like them haven't worked or at least broadly like them. I mean, hey, you look down a little more from those Bart similarity scores. You get PJ Washington, you get Paolo, you get, Wendell Carter, Julius Randle, Aaron Gordon, obviously, very all very different players, but there are paths. And I think the Queen at the moment, I think is, as a rookie is probably not going to be good on defense, but I don't think he's like a hopeless defender. Whereas with a lot of these guys like Bennett or, Vernon Carey or like Jahlil Okafor or someone like that or Sullinger, right? There weren't the high end defensive moments that Queen has. Like his hands are legitimately awesome. He is so quick reacting to passing lanes and poking out handles. Like he's just a very good active defender with his hands and he is so quick in space too. Like his motor isn't great and I think that's certainly an issue like that I understand, but Queen this year like had so many great possessions. And I remember like posting clips of this during the combine when all of like the athletic testing is coming out, right? And it's like I have seen Derik Queen change directions and move his feet in space and hedge out and switch onto guards and be a stopper in space. And like it's not perfect, but I really do think he has the potential to be a guy who adds value on defense in non-traditional ways. Like I think this is more true of him on defense than offense, but true for both ways that you're going to need to build around him more intentionally than some other bigs, right? Like he's not as easy to fit into every roster, but I think the reward with him is really high. Where obviously offensively, like again, more than like Vernon Carey, Jahlil Okafor, Jared Sullinger, like a Greg Monroe. He's much more perimeter based than those guys, like has a much better handle, much better first step, and his ability to like change directions at his size is truly special. I think he's a like again, regardless of what the athletic testing says, I truly believe he's an excellent athlete for basketball. He is a wonderful functional basketball athlete who I think the vertical is definitely a hole. That's no doubt. And that, mostly we heard him on defense, but like he's so fast, so fluid, so bendy and flexible. And like I said, the change of speed and the speed overall to me is really impressive for a player of his size. So yeah, I just think like he is a different level of advantage creator and playmaker and even potential defensive player than a lot of these somewhat similarity comps were coming out.
Yeah, I think he has sort of alluding to what you mentioned as far as like his advantage creation and sort of his athletic tools. He gets the job done on offense in a way that is very different from like a Vernon Carey just posting up on the block or something. His handle is like phenomenal,
Crazy.
phenomenal, phenomenal, phenomenal for a big. Just like, yeah, he's just super saucy. Good playing in space, like just has this like ever expansive bag of moves. Loves the spin move, his ability to like spin and then kind of decelerate. Like his deceleration at the rim is phenomenal. Um, Uses his offhand to like push aside defenders as well, which is not something that you're seeing from like a teenage freshman big. That's stuff that's kind of reserved for like your Carl Anthony Towns and guys like that. It's not he does things on offense as a slasher that you just don't really see from bigs, and I think it sets him apart from some of these more like bowling ball types where they're just catching the ball on the low block. And yeah, maybe they have like some good post moves and whatnot. But I think Queen's ability to like just dribble by guys is very different from some of those more traditional bigs. Um, yeah, just like a super apt driver and scorer down low, limited a bit by his vertical, but yeah, like he is to me like a truly special driver and ball handler. I want to ask where you are on his passing because I know that's been kind of a topic I've seen discussed on Twitter. He doesn't have like an amazing assist rate, only 11.6%, but I think the film very much says otherwise. Tons of really impressive moments on film. So I want to ask like where exactly you are on his passing. Is he one of these like super, super high feel bigs to you, or is he more of just like, yeah, he's like a good passer for a big, or are you kind of buying the assist rate where it's like, oh, he's like fine as a passer?
I definitely lean, quite optimistic on Queen, where I think so much of his like passing stats are just like or like the issues, right? Like negative assist to turnover, lower assist rates. One because of team context. He played with another non-shooting big. Didn't have like incredible guards or a ton of shooters spacing around him. So that's just going to make it a little bit harder to get assists, right? And of course, they relied on him for scoring so much. So many of his turnovers and like missed reads were just like dumb, unforced errors. Like I think his main issue is honestly just like his accuracy and his delivery and like his placement and like the velocity he throws passes with, which to me is much more fixable than the stuff that he has, like the next level feel and vision and processing and creativity. Like he throws some of the wildest passes of any player in this draft. And it's like a versatile suite of plays. Like he can make live dribble passes out of the pick and roll. He can make quick high lows or low highs out of the short roll. He can be a hub passer to cutters and throw those with both of his hands. I think he like creates windows with manipulation and timing and like anticipation like very few players in this class can, regardless of position. And of course, Queen being a monster advantage creator is very helpful for this, right? Like the fact that he can consistently bend the defense and force them to help and then create windows where I think like I trust a player as talented as him to figure it out over the years. Where I think early in his career, especially like turnovers will be an issue. Again, like I said, a lot of just like dumb plays where there's unforced errors, whether it's just like a weird decision that doesn't make sense or like he just kind of floats a pass that was pretty open. But like I said, that stuff to me is a lot more fixable than the stuff that he does well. So I'm very confident in his ability as a playmaker. And again, I think the situation and the context definitely deflated the assist rate and the assist numbers to some extent.
Yeah, I think I'm on the same page as you. I think with these big men, right? It's like sometimes it is hard to like discern how high level of a passer they are. I think Bam, who is one of the best passing bigs in the league, had like a 4% assist rate at
Yeah.
Kentucky, right? And Bam's role at Kentucky definitely differs from Queen's role at Maryland, but at the same time, it's hard to really know just off of those numbers. The numbers are important for sure. Don't get me wrong. I value them greatly, but I think with Queen, just watching what he's capable of doing on film, like his ability to like make a wide range of reads with either hand. Like there's a play that sticks out to me where he throws like a lefty pass to a cutter that's completely covered, but somehow just like squeezes it in this tight angle and it leads to a layup. Like things like that are with your offhand to a guy that is seemingly not open, that he kind of just passed open. Like those are these high level reads that you just don't really see from big men his age. So
Yeah,
yeah,
and assist rates are often deflated for bigs just by, because of their role and all, similar kind of to what we talked about with Maluach. Obviously, Queen is a much more diverse offensive player, but he has plenty of plays where he's just kind of working on the roll or cutting into space or grabbing an offensive rebound and going back up, where he's such an incredibly good interior scorer. He's such a good foul drawer, right? That sometimes the best play for him is just to go up and try to score, right? But I think it's like we said, common enough where I'm looking at the bigs with like below 12 assist rate. I remember watching a player like Joel Embiid in college who had like pretty pedestrian assist and passing numbers, but threw some of like the highest level passes you can imagine, and obviously developed into an excellent passer in his career. Not comparing Queen to Embiid necessarily, just an example. I talked about Towns earlier, right? Of players who are maybe limited passers for their role at young ages, but clearly have the talent and the skill. Like, you can see it even in spurts. Yeah, I think Bam is an excellent example of this, right? Just like the basically a nothing offensive role, or like a Jared Allen even, who isn't an amazing passer, but he's like become a good short roll guy and he can do stuff with the ball, and wasn't close to the level of passing talent a guy like Queen is at the same age. So yeah, I'm with you on the passing, I think.
yeah, for sure. I think just generally the skills that he brings to the table on the offensive end just scream like this guy has like really high end outcomes on the offensive end. Like that ability to just self create inside the arc is ridiculous. He had 89 unassisted makes at the rim this season on Bartorvik, which like that's not something that you see from other bigs. I feel like I keep saying that same sentence over and over again with him, but most big men, like the majority of their rim makes are assisted, right? Like take someone like Maluach. I think 80% of his rim makes were like on Bartorvik classified as assisted, and those other 20% are likely to be offensive rebounds. Very different players, but I think just generally speaking, you don't see bigs that are self-creating 89 rim makes in a single season. Like that's just remarkable. So like that combined with his passing and his overall touch inside the arc, I really do like his ability to just like hit tough mid-range jumpers. Like his ability to just hit shots on the move. I think the shot that everyone would cite here is the game winner in the tournament. But that tough shot making ability from the mid range, I think his mechanics are quite good in the mid range, and that he's able to just like get it up over guys. I don't know if those mechanics are super conducive to the three behind the 3 point line, but maybe there's a way to make some tweaks there. I do want to move on to the shooting because it definitely does feel like okay, like compared to Maluach, like it's like, okay, if this guy shoots, like that's really cool, but it's not something that we're projecting. I think with Queen, um, just because he is so skilled offensively, it's a little disappointing that he's not at this certain level as a shooter. But is that something that you think he can improve in the league? I think, the tough shot making and his free throw rate or free throw percentage is definitely like a good indicator. But to me, like his mechanics on those like tough mid-range jumpers, like you don't really see guys that very different player, but like someone that this sticks out to me with is like Keon Johnson, who was always really good at driving to the rim and like
Crazy
just
pull.
jumping really high and like just had a crazy high release point in the mid range, but like that's not really conducive to high level 3 point shooting. I think Queen, in like a weird way, just gives me similar vibes where I think the mechanics might need to be reworked. But I don't know. What do you make of Queen's shooting and how much do you think that matters for his overall offensive projection?
Yeah, I think I definitely agree with you that the mechanics are a little wonky. And he's just not a very impressive 3-point shooter at the moment. But I do think like you said, the mid-range stuff is great. And again, I think mechanics are something that can be improved and that can be fixed. And I think Queen has the touch and unlike Maluach, right, has the proven, mid-range pull-up shot making. I think that's something that translates to 3-point development much more than, just touch around the rim or even free throw shooting. And Queen is really great at that. Where, you know, I'm just waiting for the season where Queen gets to take like 4 pull-up threes a game and just see how it goes. Maybe that'll be this season if he goes to a bad team. I don't know. But yeah, I think, we've seen examples of guys who weren't really excellent 3-point shooters in college, but were really great, kind of, good free throw shooters who shot a bunch of long twos. Like Miles Turner always pops into my mind for this, where, obviously was a better shooter in college than Queen was, but, wasn't a dynamic 3-point shooter by any means, right? Whereas Queen is. I think of Olynyk as another example of this. Didn't take a ton of threes, amazing mid-range shooter, great free throw guy. So I think there's enough historical precedent to buy Queen improving as a shooter. Vucevic, another example of this. But I don't think like kind of like Maluach in a very different way. Like I don't need Queen to be a knockdown shooter to be amazing. Like I don't think he needs it. It's definitely nice and it would help, but considering I view him as like a downhill advantage creator at his ceiling, right? Someone who has the ball in his hands and is just unstoppable on drives. And for that role, I think having the mid-range counter is really important. Where teams can't just fully Ben Simmons style back off of you because Queen will pull from 15 feet and he'll be efficient from there, right? Like they'll back off of him to some extent, but I think having the kind of mid-range creation he does separates him from a lot of these like power drivers where even if Queen doesn't develop into a legit shooter, which I would probably bet against. Again, just like Maluach, I think it's possible, but I wouldn't bet on it. He can still be a really damn good scorer. So I think, again, like glad you included like the how much does it really matter point, right?
Yeah, I think like with him, to me at least, it matters a little more because I think there are like legitimate like star outcomes with him offensively, right? And I think if
Mhm.
he is to like hit that like very high end ceiling outcome, you'd hope that the shooting is further along. At the same time, like there are guys sort of in his similar ish role. He is a very unique player, so there's not like a great one-to-one comparison for him, but like I think Shengun is a
Yeah,
guy
he's the easiest one, I
where
think.
like
Perfect.
there's a lot of like cool stuff as far as that downhill creation goes, similar measurements, and he's someone that I mean, it's just his fourth year in the league and his shooting has not improved a lick, right? I mean, he's 27% for his career and it's 23% this past season, taking one a game to maybe keep the defense a little bit honest. But um, yeah, there's a way to like make this work and for him to still be a very high impact offensive player. So I definitely agree with you as far as like, hey, this guy can still be super high impact on offense, even without the jumper. But I do think
Obviously
if
helps.
he's going to
Yeah.
hit those like really star level outcomes, that I think he maybe has a chance of hitting just because he has some of
If he,
those
yeah.
like traits, right? With like the tough shot making and just like the super high level processing. Like those are kind of the traits you look for in guys that can be big time offensive initiators. I think the shot would be, the thing that like really takes him over the edge.
If he's like a legit shooter, even kind of off dribble, like there is the ceiling for him is unbelievable to me. We're like, I mean, Şengün even, with his offensive limitations, and like I think Queen is going to be a much better finisher. Like I think another big issue with Şengün is like his touch around the intermediate and as like an interior scorer is just not great. Where Queen, that's obviously one of his big strengths. But yeah, I think you see like a player like that where he's improved a lot defensively. Like he had a career year on defense this year, just being mobile, losing weight, getting more mobile, using his excellent hands, being just enough at the rim. Where I think Şengün and him probably have like similar enough measurements to make this comparison. And like, yeah, Şengün is not a perfect player, but like he's very young and already like a top 40-ish guy, I'd say, pretty comfortably. And I think that's a huge win with a top five pick generally. And I think Queen, like we talked about, though it's far from a guarantee, has these outcomes where I think he is a legitimate offensive centerpiece. Probably not going to be your like 1A guy on a championship level team. There's seven of those guys in the world, if that, at any time, at any given time. But yeah, I think in this draft, outside of Harper and Cooper Flag, Queen has the highest like advantage creation upside, scoring on ball upside with, of course, the playmaking he has. Hence why I'm just extremely high on Derik Queen. I think he's phenomenal, and I take him very high.
Yeah, I definitely what it was one of those things where like I think going into kind of watching him, I was a little bit skeptical. And he's the second player that like in this kind of podcast series, because I think with Cedric Coward, I kind of went in with this skeptical eye of like, okay, he's like this super late riser. Like this is always kind of a bad sign. But I ended up being really impressed with him. And I think Queen similarly. Şengün is someone I was too low on. Like I have
Me
always kind
too.
of erred on the side of caution with these one-way bigs, but I think with Queen, there's just so much to like there as far as that offensive skill set that he's not someone that I want to miss out on just because I'm like, oh, well, how does he play defense? Right. There's definitely worries I have on defense. I think the motor is definitely a concern on that end. I don't think like he has like a bad motor overall or something like on offense. Like his tenacity on the offensive glass, I think is really good. Like he's always like kind of like deflecting the ball to himself and getting second chance opportunities. But yeah, there are possessions that he takes off defensively that will worry you. At the same time, right? And you can take this with a grain of salt. Maryland was like fifth in defensive efficiency in the country, even with him as like their big minute getter, right? Like there's a way to construct a good defense with him on the floor. College is very different from the NBA for sure, but I don't think Queen is as bad or as harmful on that end as some of these other like one way big prospects that have come into the league.
Definitely
3.9%
agree.
was his block rate this season, which I think like isn't bad in a vacuum. It's quite low for someone that's you're projecting to be a defensive anchor as like a center or whatever. But yeah, I think he's an interesting case, right? Because on that end of the floor, I think you just want you mentioned this a few minutes ago, but I think it just takes a little bit more creativity, right? Like there's some team building constraints that you're just going to have while building your defense, right? Like I think Şengün is like the perfect example of this. They have a bunch of very rangy guys that can cover for him. I think for Queen, going to have to be something similar potentially.
For
So
sure. And like you can see how this doesn't work out with like as similar-ish with build body type with a guy like Sabonis, who I think is less like elastic and athletic than both Şengün and Queen, but like the Kings have no real wings outside of Keegan Murray. They don't have any other, guys who can protect the rim from the guard or the wing room or any other good bigs. Like their point of attack defense is pretty limited outside of like a Keon Ellis or hopefully a Devin Carter in the future. And we see their defense be terrible because of it, right? But roster construction is going to be important for him, as we're saying, but I don't think that should be a reason to deter a team from taking him high. Like that's just like laziness to me. It's like you shouldn't
yeah.
pass on a guy who you think can be really special because you're going to have to put in some time to and some effort and some forethought into making that work. Because I think the reward is extremely high for a team that commits to that.
Yeah, for sure. He definitely is someone that, and I said this a bit ago, but just has these kind of star outcomes on offense in my mind. And I think that definitely propels him up my board. And I think um, over a guy like Maluach, in my opinion, like I
Yeah.
think just like as far as forming a big board goes, I would have Queen ranked ahead just because I think even if with Maluach, I think he has those like surefire NBA skills. Queen, I think the floor is definitely low. Like there's a chance that it just doesn't work out on defense. Maybe he needs that jump shot to be around. Maybe the passing isn't exactly as functional as we think it is. I think there's a floor with him where like he is just not returning anywhere near like top 5 or 6 value, but there's a chance that he's one of the best players in this class. And I think there's a realistic path to that. So he's
As
someone that I think I'm high on. But any more Queen thoughts, or should we move along to Sorber?
Yeah, I think we covered it. I have him third on my board. I'm ridiculously high on him. Like you said, floor is a real issue. I think offensively, I think he has a pretty solid floor just because of like the interior scoring and the rebounding. Like, I definitely think even in the universe where he just can't play defense, he's going to be able to find ways to be impactful on offense. But yeah, like you said, there's a real floor, there's real downside. But especially at the top of the draft, like at least to me, right? You got to shoot for ceiling. And Queen obviously has a super high ceiling, as we talked about, but I really do think it's more realistic than a lot of guys like him just because of how ridiculously talented he is with the ball in his hands, with enough other stuff to kind of go with it. But yeah, I think that's about it for Queen.
Perfect. Yeah, Queen's definitely an exciting player. Why don't we move on to Sorber here? So Thomas Sorber, Georgetown guy. For those of you guys that don't know, I'm also a Georgetown guy. So I watched Sorber play a good
Some
bit.
home cooking here,
Some home cooking here. Yeah, I watched Sorber play pretty frequently in person. I can say with confidence that he is the guy that contributed the most to any sort of buzz, if you could even call it that, that Georgetown had this year. Because I mean, it's been rough. I just this was my third year of college. The first 2 years were really rough. We did not do a lot of winning, and it's not like we took over the Big East or anything this season, but um, you could just sense that there was more excitement around the program with Cooley this year, and Sorber, as far as like a player on the court, was the catalyst of that. With him, I think the defense is obviously the selling point. I tweeted this out a couple weeks ago, but Sorber got injured at some point, like missed the last like 10 games of the season. Um, so while Sorber was on the floor for those first 20 some games, teams shot 45.2% from inside the arc against Georgetown, which was the 15th best 2 point defense in the country. And then after the injury in those last 8, 9, 10 games, teams shot 61.3%,
Jesus.
which was 358th in the country. So it was cool to see Georgetown like actually have like a top ranked in the country anything. And I think it was literally all because of how good Sorber is at protecting the paint and just generally playing defense inside the arc and around the rim. So, um, yeah, what is it on defense that you think makes Sorber such a phenomenal prospect? And maybe you don't view him as phenomenal. I'm kind of putting words in your mouth here, but
No, I'm a big Sorber guy. I mean, I don't know if I'd have him. I don't know where you have him on your board, or like, or I definitely think he's a lottery guy. I mean, I think he's underrated by consensus, and I think is a worthwhile lottery pick. And I think a good portion of that is certainly defensive. Doesn't have the same block issues that a guy like Queen has, where he is so good with his verticality, like being able to defend the rim and contest shots without fouling. And he can just be like a brick wall at the rim where it's just impossible to get over him. Players will drive at him and then pass up shots or drive right out or pass the ball away just because they don't really want to go up against him because of how crazy he is as a paint protector. Like he's not an amazing post-up defender, because just because he can be kind of upright, and I think players can get him on that. And he's not like the most elite athlete or anything. And I do think there are some issues I have with like how he takes contact and like the strength in the upper body with, taking bumps and overall. But the combination of, his awareness, his reaction times, and the size and like the technique as a rim protector is so good. Like he's so damn good at like reading passing lanes and diagnosing what's in front of him and making the right play. And his conditioning, I think obviously the injury sucks. Like it's just a bummer, but like he was playing a lot of minutes. Like he played multiple, I think he had like 3 or 4 games where he played, 40 minutes or almost the whole game. I remember that like insane game he had against Providence where he played the whole game and was just dominating on both ends for the entire time. Like all of this as a very young player, right? Someone who is, pretty normal age for freshman, like going to be like 19 and a half on draft night. Again, maybe like Maluach doesn't have like the kind of short area quickness or crazy, hit mobility to play fully in space on the perimeter, but he's one of the better just like paint protecting bigs in the draft, no doubt, I think.
yeah, I think like with him, just the you saw it the way he impacted this team when he was off the floor. I mean, the season kind of fell apart right when he got injured. Um, but yeah, like his traits definitely translate to the pro level, in my opinion. Just that like awareness that you were talking about. He processes things so quickly on defense, and he has a 7'6" wingspan, right? So
Yeah, another one of these like standing reach demons who's like under 6'10" without shoes, but crazy wingspan, crazy reach, which I think helps obviously for like, rim protection stuff.
yeah, so that like combination of just having the physical tools to play make on defense and then also having the wherewithal to just like read what's in front of him just makes him an uber impactful events creator on defense, right? So he had a 2.7% steal rate, which is very high for someone that is playing as a center. And he's just really impactful in the passing lanes and plugging gaps, intercepting passes, just getting deflections. Someone that is just very active on that end. Like he always has the motor running hot. And then yeah, protecting the rim. I think there are some issues there. I think he could definitely he measured at like 260 at the combine, which is heavier than Maluach. He seems like he definitely gained weight from where he was during the season.
Yeah, I mean, he just like doesn't play so functionally strong all the time, which I mean, again, he's a teenager. But yeah,
Yeah, there are definitely plays where like he's defending in the post and he'll get bumped off his spot, but I think he does a good job of just like always keeping his arms in the air so that like even when he does get bounced back a little bit, he can still get a good contest just because he has such long arms. But I generally do agree with you. I think that there are times where against like a really like strong physical big man just darting one on one, he can struggle. Um yeah, I think with him defensively too. Like, where are you at on him as someone that's going to guard out on the perimeter? Do you think that's going to be part of his game? Do you think he's someone that's going to be switching out and sort of playing up high in coverage, or do you think he's someone that you want to keep more towards the rim?
I'd say unlikely. I definitely view him as more of a paint defender where he can, just like moving in a straight line, he can definitely, get low and move his feet and cut off drives. But I think even more so than Malawash, like the hip mobility, the short area quickness, like he really struggles to like change directions when he has to close out to a shooter and recover, or quickly turn in pick and roll coverage playing at the level. So. I definitely view Sorber as like more of a paint centric defender. I don't think he's like a total like lumbering big. Like he's not slow. I think that's probably a little harsh, but I wouldn't say his mobility is like a big plus for the position either. Where, again, like I said, can kind of switch out a little bit and make some plays just with his speed and with his length. But unlike, we talked about Malawash's just big space ground coverage being such an unbelievably positive trait where he can just like cover huge swaths of ground with speed and size. Where Sorber, I don't think as much like that. I think he's more of a traditional like mid drop big where I think he can, kind of hedge a little bit. You can get away with him high at the level, but it's also a thing where Georgetown didn't really ask him to do that. Like
Yeah.
unlike a Duke scheme, right, where Maluach was doing everything, and they had Cooper Flag behind him and other defenders. Sorber, as you kind of alluded to, like they needed him to defend the paint, right? So they were parking him with the basket, they were playing him in deep drop, and I think that's something he's going to be excellent at the NBA level, where maybe there's like more kind of perimeter potential than I'm giving him credit for because we just haven't seen it as much. But I do think there are physical limitations, mainly his hips and like how kind of upright he can be with a high center of gravity, whereas like to keep bringing up Malawach, his ability to like get low in his stance is just freaky for a guy his size. Where Sorber isn't really like that. Like he definitely, I think again, I remember like quite a couple of sessions against like a Zach Fremantle in the Xavier games where he'd pretty easily like turn him because of the uprightness. But yeah, I view him more as a paint defender than a perimeter one, but I don't think he's like a horrible perimeter defender by any means. Just not someone who I think of as like a huge plus.
Yeah, I agree. And I think kind of what I mentioned with Malawach, right? Like you want to play the hits with these guys, especially just like early in their careers. I think Malawach, like role wise, at least on defense, you're kind of expecting him to be more similar to like a Malawach as far as just protecting the rim and just being a deterrent in the paint. I think his technique is ahead of Maluach in drop, like
Miles. I
by
mean, his technique and his feel and like his processing are like he's going to be so much more impactful early in his career. I mean, again, I
yeah,
think the ceiling might be a little lower, but I think first year or two he's going to be so much better than Malawash, and I think that's because of Malawash's rawness, but also because I think really highly of Sorber's defensive ability too.
yeah, for sure. And I think like again, just you want to play the hits with these guys. Like he's very good in drop. Like play him in drop most of the time. I think he can like late switch in a pinch and survive. Like I think he's pretty decent sliding east west, but like yeah, he just wasn't asked to like run around out there very much throughout the season. I think there was moments where he did get switched out there and would struggle to contain shiftier players, but yeah, I think with him, you just want to keep him in the paint as much as possible because that's where he's at his best and can really disrupt things. Um, Offensively, I will say I do have some concerns with his overall translation. I think the pro is that he processes the game really well, is a great passer on the move, just makes really snappy, quick decisions. I think the cons is that the main con is that I just don't know exactly how he scores in the pros because yeah, he's just not a great vertical athlete. He had 21 dunks in 24 games this season, which is pretty low for a big man. Like even Queen, who is not considered to be like a good vertical athlete by any means, was dunking more than Sorber did this year. Um, and his just overall efficiency really dipped versus good opponents. So he had against top 50 teams, his true shooting was 46.7%, which is
Yeesh.
pretty scary. So on one hand, like I love the processing, I love his ability to like set screens and just do those kind of like little things on offense. On the other hand, he's not someone that's very impactful as a scorer on the roll, and he's not someone that is just giving you really anything as a shooter right now. Maybe like some little face up mid range close jumpers, but
How would you who are you more confident in as a long-term shooter, Queen or Sorber?
I would
And I
definitely,
assume you'd have both those two over Malawash.
yeah, I would definitely lean towards Queen just because I think there's more versatility as far as what he's giving you as like a tough shot maker inside the arc. I think with Sorber, like you see some flashes of him like facing up and hitting a mid range jumper. But like with Queen, I think there's just like a different level of like the difficulty in those shots that he's making where it's like, okay, Queen could be like a very special shot maker. I don't think Sorber really has that yet, even though I don't think he has bad touch. Like I think he has good
His
touch
touch is good. I think
around
his
the
touch
rim.
is it's not like Malawash level, but it's good.
Yeah, like he has very good touch around the rim. And like there's also like some really enticing moments where like he does catch it on the roll and he's able to like contort his body and finish at a tough angle or something like that. But I just don't think he has the verticality to like be this high volume roll man. Even with his long wingspan, he's just not um, super quick off the ground to the point where I can see him just like being a guy that catches lobs at a high level in the NBA. I just don't think that's really his game. So, yeah, I definitely have some concerns about what he does on offense, despite being very, very high on his defense.
Yeah, I'd say I agree. I feel like I'm maybe a little more optimistic than you sound because I do think like there's some pretty impressive driving potential with his fluidity and some of the ball handling stuff he can do at his size. Like he's no Queen by any means, but some of the stuff where like he's someone who like his like fluidity and athleticism is much more like it's much more conducive to offensive success than defensive success, where like he can really bend his like bend at the waist and get his shoulder below other bigs and drive by them. And like you said, his balance and ability to like contort in midair, and because he has great touch, you can make shots with both hands from a lot of different places. And while like he probably isn't that great of a shooting bet, like his volume's a little higher than Queen. He showed some like mid-range stuff off movement, like a little bit of face-up stuff. And like you said, the passing is just so excellent. Maybe not like the most incredible like short roll processor, but I think from like the post or the elbow, like he's so good at reading doubles, reading the defense, making interior reads, kicking out to the perimeter to shooters. And I think I have similar worries strength wise, where like it's easy to knock him off of his spot. I think his hands aren't the best. I don't know what he measured hand wise. I'm actually gonna look this up right now. What? Yeah, he does have small hands. So like 9 inch width, 8 inch, 8 inch hand length. When you compare it to Malawachu, who has 10.25 inch and 10 length, or a guy like Queen who has 9.50 and 9. So his hands are a bit smaller, and I think that does check out on tape with what I'd seen with like the contact and catching the ball in traffic and going up. But I think for teams who are looking for like a connector big, right? Like someone who plays more of like a hub role than a scoring play finishing role, which is more common in the NBA now than it's been maybe ever. There's a place for him for sure. And I think there's enough upside with his great touch and coordination and like the reach where I could imagine a world where he's like a good enough scorer to get the most out of his other good traits on offense. I agree with you. Like, I think his upside is a little limited on offense because I doubt he's ever going to be like a guy who can really score on volume efficiently. But again, just like quick, hooks and floaters, he's going to be awesome on the mid-range face-up stuff. I trust him on, and I do believe like it's not a guarantee, but I think that he has the physical tools, the coordination, and some of the handling flashes to develop into, a more impressive driver than we saw him do at Georgetown. Because again, that just wasn't really his role. But I do broadly agree with you that I think the vertical athleticism, the strength, kind of the high center of gravity, unlike Queen or Maluash, does have some concerns long term.
Yeah, yeah. I think I'll be interested to see how that sort of like face up driving game develops because there was, like you said, like a lot of really interesting moments. He's quite fluid. And yeah, that like contortion ability around the rim is really cool. I do wonder how it all translates to like the
Yeah,
NBA level. Like I think he's gonna be on the floor early in his career, I hope, just because of how polished he is
you'd think
on the
so.
defensive end. So I'm hoping that like get him in like a good bench unit, have like a good bench guard type creator around him. And then yeah, give him a couple possessions a game where he can kind of like develop those skills. But yeah, I mean, for me, like the pitch with him is definitely on that defensive end of the floor. And that's, he has those like NBA skills that you look for on that end. And I think making it work on offense is going to be the big question. But again, there are like favorable traits that I think he can provide value with, like with the passing and some of those fluidity things that we mentioned. But yeah, you got any other Sorber thoughts?
No, I think that's about it. I mean, I just think he's going to be a really solid NBA player. Like, I don't view him as a crazy high ceiling bet or anything, but I think having competent starting bigs is important for like raising a team's floor, especially. And I think Sorber, I view him as a guy who can absolutely be a good starting center in the league. Like, I don't know, like Jakob Poeltl quality type player,
Yeah.
someone who's not necessarily a total game changer, but like if you have great players around him, that's a guy who you can win with, or a Wendell Carter, someone who he gets compared to a lot, right? The same kind of, again, if you have the guys around him, you can win. And that's ultimately where I think of Sorber is someone who I think has the floor raising skills, but like if the offense really comes around with his passing, there could be some ceiling raising stuff there as well too, especially on offense. But yeah, he's interesting. I don't think I'm quite as high on him as Malawash or Queen, but I mean, I'm higher than consensus. I think he's certainly a lottery level guy, and anything outside of that would be just like great value.
Yeah, I'm still formulating my board here, but I think just like ranking the three guys that we talked about today, um, I would honestly have a hard time imagining any of them falling outside of my lottery, even though
Yeah,
again, still putting all the
agreed.
pieces together. But ranking them, I'd put Queen number one just because I think there's access to those high level outcomes on offense that these other two guys just don't really have. I think Maluach and Sorber are a little bit closer for me. But I would err towards Maluach just because I think those
Yeah,
physical skills
we're
are just so ridiculous. And then
we're
that
very
combined
aligned.
with
We're very
the
aligned
touch.
here.
Yeah, and then I'd put Sorber third, but that's not a knock. Like I don't even know where he is on consensus, to be totally
The
honest.
rookie scale consensus board has him at 18. I've seen mocks with
Yeah.
him, in the early 20s. I think that's way too low. Well, like he's too good, like too valuable an archetype to me to be fading that hard. And I think the fact that he was injured probably contributes as well. Like people just like the exposure to him is less than other guys, like out of sight, out of mind, kind of. But
Yeah, so I'd say I'm higher than like I don't even have 18 guys ranked, but yeah, I'm higher than that 18th spot. Like he'll end up in a higher spot than that. So me ranking him third is definitely not a slight. I'm compared to the rookie scale consensus, I'm higher than Sorber, higher on Sorber than the consensus. But yeah, I guess we can wrap things up here unless you got anything else, Ben.
no, I mean, I think I'd rank them the same way as you. I've Queen a pretty clear tier ahead of Malawash and Sorber, and then I prefer Malawash, but within the same range, within the same tier, mid-late lottery kind of target. Where Queen is someone who I think is like a legit high lottery level guy.
Yeah.
No, I think
I didn't
that's
even
about
prompt you to rank because the way we were talking, I just assumed
yeah.
you
No,
had the
I
same
just
thing going on.
yeah, we didn't discuss this beforehand, but we just happen to have a lot of the same thoughts on these players.
Yeah, no, it's funny how that works out, but
But yeah,
um,
I think we covered a lot of it.
yeah, for sure. So yeah, Ben, thanks for coming on. We'll definitely try to do more stuff for the draft here, but yeah, any work you have coming out that you want to plug on your YouTube channel, your Twitter, or
Yeah, just
writing?
at BJPF underscore on Twitter, my name on YouTube. Gonna definitely be having some, writing and previews on the finals. I'm very excited that my Pacers are in the finals. That's absolutely crazy. And then yeah, of course, plenty of scouting, plenty of draft stuff before the game. But thanks for having me on. Yeah.
Perfect. All right. And yeah, we'll link Ben's Twitter in the Spotify and Apple podcast description so you guys can follow him. Lots of great stuff coming out over there. So yeah, thank you all for listening and we'll see you next time.